When I first finished Fate Stay Night, I was shocked by a sentiment that still persists to this day. Fate Stay Night is at once one of the best and worst things I've ever read, encapsulating some manic highs that are no doubt what propelled the property and in fact Type Moon as a company forward since, but also some stunning lows that are downright shocking when considering the previous work of main scenario writer Kinoko Nasu. This video will no doubt be a little long, but it's my hope that through dissecting the main Fate duology, that is Fate Stay Night and Fate Hollow Ataraxia, that everyone will not only obtain a greater understanding of the core of this monstrous franchise, but see what caused its enormous growth and what we can learn from it even today. Throughout the video, I'm going to make a few references to Nasu's earlier works, but I wouldn't say that you need any foreknowledge to get a full comprehension per se. Let's get started. Fate Stay Night is a visual novel and was the third major work helmed by Type Moon and center man, the writer Kinoko Nasu. When looking at Nasu's work history, you'll see some commonalities that bleed directly into Fate. Both Karo no Kyokai and Tsukihime are modern fantasies with a deep lexicon of information and world-building encapsulating a deeply personal narrative. While there's a lot of spectacle and fanfare about the nature of mages, vampires, and other such magical beings hidden beneath the surface of the real world, the stories at their cores are simply about people struggling against themselves. Kokuto, Shiki Ryugi, and Shiki Tono are all very fragmented people struggling against their own nature and inability within a magical world. The struggles they face are all outward representations of their own inner struggles. The easiest way to describe Fate Stay Night in relation to these previous works is simply the word more. There are more characters, more extraneous lexiconal world building, higher highs and lower lows. While certainly no Umineko no Nakokoro ni, Fate Stay Night is a massive game, and one that is still firmly in Type Moon's wheelhouse. Throughout the story you're told about many systems of magic, of servants, masters, and the Holy Grail. But it's all window dressing for the core personal story of the protagonist Shiro Emiya and his struggle to place his own flawed ideals against the flawed, unideal world. Fate Stay Night, like most visual novels, is an anthology of stories. There are 3 rounds of Stay Night that each focus on different members of the cast and more importantly focus on a different part of Shiro Emiya. While various releases of the game have changed the necessary route order, we will look at the 3 stories, Fate, Unlimited Blade Works, and Heaven's Feel, in the order that they were originally told, starting with the story simply entitled Fate. Shiro Emiya is a boy who lives alone in a large estate following the untimely death of his adopted father. In spite of this dose of tragedy, though, he doesn't really want for anything. Shiro is well off and lives in the frequent company of a lifelong friend, his school teacher and surrogate sister, Taiga Fujimura. While Shiro isn't the most popular kid around, he has 2 more good friends in the meek Sakura Miko and the eccentric Issei Ryudo. The start of Fate is a little slow, but even from these mundane interactions you can get a good sense of how Shiro Emiya interfaces with the world. He's self-made, capable of cooking and cleaning all on his own. He's kind and always willing to offer a helping hand. And yet we also get the briefest understanding that Shiro was chased by something. Shiro used to be a talented member of the archery club, but quit out of an innate discomfort the mechanical task gave him, and very importantly, his late father adopted him following Shiro's involvement in a devastating citywide fire in which Shiro lost his whole family. Shiro was a positive guy, but these elements of darkness nag at him as he goes about his otherwise fulfilling daily life. It's in this opening segment that we are first introduced to the concept of magic. In the world of Fate, which is incidentally a shared world with Nasu's previous works, magic exists hidden away from the eyes of the common folk. Shiro's adopted father was a magus, and at Shiro's behest, tried to teach Shiro magic as well, but alas, Shiro doesn't really have a talent for it, and his magical ability is limited to some rudimentary analysis and fortification spells. And yet we see that Shiro practices magic every day, habitually. This brings us to one of the most important things to understand about Shiro Emiya. He is fundamentally broken. The details of this will become much clearer later on, but for now, simply understand that Shiro doesn't practice magic because he wants to be some sort of grand magus. Rather, it's more like he practices magic simply because no one ever told him to stop. We see a lot of Shiro's daily life in the opening. Taiga watches over Shiro, Sakura frequently visits him and keeps him company, and Issei understands him as his closest friend. This brings us to the inciting incident of the story. Perhaps the single most important thematic focal point of Fate Stay Night is the look into heroism and the heroic ideal. The idea of the hero is something that haunts Shiro like a ghost, and so it's fitting that what embroils him in the story at large is Shiro staying late after school to do other people's work for them, simply because he can. Shiro is at school late at night when he overhears and sees something bizarre. A man in red fighting a man in blue on the campus of his school. These two notice Shiro watching them and the man in blue promptly gives chase, killing Shiro in the hallway of his school. Just as he's about to be thrown into the darkness of death, he hears a voice call out to him, before blacking out. Except Shiro doesn't die. For some reason, he wakes up and is still alive and well. Taking it to be some sort of omen, he rushes back home in fear. But it's not long before that fear manifests as the Blue Lancer returns to finish the job. Shiro tries and fails to fend him off. Running off to his shed, where at a loss for anything to believe in, he cries out for salvation, and a voice answers his call. Shiro unwillingly forms a contract that embroils him in a deadly game that can change the world. A girl clad in silver armor appears seemingly out of thin air and repels the Lancer. Before Shiro has time to process what's actually happening to him, the red swordsman from the school catches up to him as well. The Night Girl is able to injure the swordsman, but before their battle can progress any further, Shiro cries out for the knight to stop fighting, as he sees the face of one of his classmates, Tosaka-rin, standing in turn with the swordsman. The knight is compelled to follow Shiro's order, and as such, the story begins in earnest. From this inciting incident, one can already get a good sense of many of the strengths and weaknesses of Fate. Starting with the positives is the character design. While Shiro Emiya himself is a little plain looking as of now, the knight, the swordsman, the lancer, and Tosaka-rin have impeccable character designs and striking silhouettes. Saying nothing of their actual character, if one simply compares Rin to Akiha, a similar aesthetic character from Tsukihime, one can clearly see how a myriad of small design details make Rin much more striking than Akiha on a design level. It's not excessive, but her hair, the cross on her sweater, they all go to make Rin pop. The same can be said about all of the other new characters thus, with the Night Girl being an exceptional standout. The action is also well paced and does a lot of dynamic things with the camera to give the combat a sense of motion and weight that is particularly special in the medium of visual novels. However, we can also see a lot of flaws. This sequence introduces 3 new characters and implicates Rin as being more important than her brief appearance before would suggest. This is on top of the healthy cast that was already introduced, and we are not even close to seeing the entire cast of the story. What makes this worse is that in terms of their thematic and plot relevance, it could well be argued that of the characters introduced so far, only the Red Swordsman and the Night Girl really matter. If nothing else, they are certainly the only characters that matter to Shiro Emiya's own character arc. Fate's Day Night is as cluttered as it is illogical. There's another huge problem with how these first few fights are told, but to understand that, we have to progress the narrative a little bit more. Shiro and Rin come to a ceasefire as Rin realizes that Shiro has no idea what he's gotten himself into. Taking pity on her classmate, she takes him to a local church where the priest, a towering man and moderator of this whole mess named Kotomine Kirei, explains to Shiro what he's become part of. The Holy Grail War is an event where 7 mages, called Masters, enlist the aid of 7 powerful fighters, called Servants, to engage in a death game to earn a wish-granting device called the Holy Grail. The Red Swordsman, the Night Girl, and the Blue Lancer are all servants that were summoned by some master or another, which means that Rin and Shiro are 2 of the 7 masters. The servants are separated into classes: the Saber, the Lancer, the Archer, the Rider, the Caster, the Berserker, and the Assassin. The Red Swordsman is actually the Archer, and will be referred to as such from now on. The Night Girl was the Saber, and the Lancer was, well, the Lancer. The servants are called by their class distinction as to hide their true identities, which are actually prominent figures from history or myth, as knowing their identity would better allow others to fight and strategize against them. Knowing this, we can circle back to another problem with the storytelling. Within the menu, we can see that every character is a bunch of RPG stats, which exist as more lexiconal information that doesn't really matter, except for when it's used to break the convention and tension of the narrative. We now understand that Shiro Emiya, in a moment of desperation, summoned the Saber to protect him from the Lancer, even if this unwillingly involved him in the Holy Grail War. But in their fight, we see the Lancer use his signature attack, called his Noble Phantasm. This is supposed to be a special attack that is unique to the hero that uses it, and is to be used with care, as it is so unique as to typically reveal the identity of the servant. For Lancer, this attack is a homing strike to the heart which can never miss, and requires that Lancer reveal the name of his lance to activate it. Lancer cries out, "Gaebolg," revealing his identity as the Irish hero Cuchulainn, and this should stab Saber through the heart. But it doesn't. Saber is able to dodge the undodgeable blow because she has a high luck stat. This does 2 major things for the narrative. 1, it shows a flagrant disregard for strategy as Lancer is willing to reveal his identity on day 1 of the Holy Grail War, and 2, it severely undercuts the tension of combat when we now know that rules can and will be broken by things as nonsensical as luck. This stems from the obvious problem that Lancer's attack is too good. It literally never works and kills anyone for the rest of the visual novel in any of the routes. An instant kill shot is so powerful that it can't actually be used, or the power balance would just vanish. And the fighting has many, many more moments of incoherence going forward. Returning to the plot though, Shiro is conflicted about participating in the Holy Grail War for the simple reason that he doesn't want to kill anyone. But ultimately, he resigns himself to participate to make sure that the Grail isn't used for evil, vowing not to take the lives of any of the Masters along the way. Rin is a little disgruntled, both with Shiro's attitude as well as the fact that a flunky magus like him could join the esteemed Grail War to begin with, but at the very least she gives him a bye for the night, knowing that as the Grail War goes on, it will inevitably lead them to being enemies. That said, Archer and especially Rin only ever function as minor antagonists at most, and that's stretching it. They're actually secondary allies for more or less all the routes. This concludes the introductory segment of the story. The arcs follow mostly a similar structure, starting with an introduction, followed by a couple smaller stories before reaching the character climax. The problem here is that the intermittent story arcs are rarely of lasting import for the core characters and their development. Think back to how I identified that of the already large cast, only a small handful mattered in the long term, while others like Issei were soon to disappear almost in their entirety. The intermittent arcs largely dealing with thinning the cast, such that the important characters can receive the focus of the narrative. It's here that we deal with the ever-repugnant Shinji Mato, master of the rider class servant, the caster servant, and the mysterious girl Ilya with her servant berserker. Due to the nature of the fate route structure, we will grow acquainted with the assassin class servant as well, but of all those characters, only Ilya plays a large role in the development of Shiro Emiya, and even that is mostly relegated to Heavensfeel. To briefly address the shaft, Shinji Mato is the brother of the aforementioned Sakura Mato. He has an inferiority complex because, in spite of the fact that the Matos are a storied family of mages, his father broke the chain, and so Shinji wasn't able to become a full-fledged magus. That said, he's participating in the Grail War to prove himself. The problem with Shinji is that what I just described is literally his entire character, and for most of the story he's just a 2-bit villain. He stands as a moral check for Shiro, who doesn't want to kill anyone in spite of the fact that Shinji is a dangerous, belligerent asshole. Dealing with Shinji is one of the first things to be done in all of the routes, which makes plenty of sense. He is not a practiced mage, and his inferiority leads him to make brash and stupid tactical decisions which bring danger to him. His servant rider gets a bit more screen time in Heavensfeel, but she's a criminally underused character generally speaking. It's during the Shinji story arc that we also learn the true identity of Saber, which brings up a well-known head-scratcher in the series. Saber is King Arthur, King of Britain. Now, you're probably rightfully asking yourself, wait, is Saber not a girl? Well, Fate's Day Night was originally planned to be quite different from what it actually is, and a large part of that is that the gender of the protagonist was actually supposed to be swapped. The main character was supposed to be a girl, who participated in the Holy Grail War and summoned the heroic spirit King Arthur of the Saber class. However, at some point in design, the story changed. This is likely to conform to the conventions in the medium, which frequently highlight a male protagonist with a semi-harem of females that each story arc focuses on. And as such, the character of Saber was changed to be a girl so that she can be in a romantic relationship with Shiro, but her identity as King Arthur stayed the same because it has character relevance. Indeed, the strict adherence to the way of visual novels is one of the more unfortunate things about the telling of the story, as each arc has a different romantic interest for Shiro and none of these relationships are particularly strong. Shiro and Saber definitely share the strongest relationship in Stay Night by far, while his relationship with Rin in Unlimited Blade Works gets overshadowed by other elements of the narrative, and his relationship with Sakura in Heavensfeel is strange and rushed to the point of seeming unhealthy. And while she isn't a romantic interest, Ilya is actually the only other girl with whom Shiro develops a strong personal and thematic relationship with throughout the story. But alas, that is much more backlogged in the narrative. But speaking of Ilya, she's interesting as so far as that it's through the early interactions with Ilya and Berserker that Shiro Emiya as a character really starts to develop. Early on, Shiro fights against Ilya and her towering, monstrous servant Berserker. Things take a quick turn for the worse and Saber appears to be in danger, so Shiro throws himself in the path of the monsters below to save her, taking life-threatening damage. They ward off the master and servant, Ilya taking an interest in Shiro as a person, and barely manage to save Shiro's life. Rather than being praised, Shiro is berated for his stupid actions, and that's really the point. Shiro is crazy. He is a child intoxicated by the dream of being a hero, a martyr that would readily throw himself away for others, a fool with no regard for his own life. Throughout the story, Shiro chastises himself for his uselessness, lamenting his inability to help Saber, Rin, or Archer in combat. He wants to help. He wants to save people, while also being a failed magus who couldn't so much as raise a blade against those legends. While Shinji's complex comes from others telling him he can't be good enough, Shiro's comes from him telling himself that he isn't good enough. The story goes on addressing the various problems at hand to the best of Shiro and Rin's ability. Shinji is swiftly dealt with dipping out of the Holy Grail War, while Castor and their master are slain mysteriously in the night. We learn little about the cold, abrasive Archer, other than that he can't stand Shiro in the way he thinks, before he gives his life to let the team escape from pursuing Ilya and Berserker, while taking away a few of the Beast Knight lives. Due to the bloat of the story, many things need to happen before we can arrive at the main focus of the arc, the relationship between Shiro and Saber, and what it says about the both of them. If the Holy Grail is won, not only does the Master get the right to make a wish, so does the Servant. It's the reason that they offer up their souls to fight to begin with. Saber's wish as King Arthur is to have never drawn the sword from the stone. While Arthur was a revered and beloved ruler, it was their oversight and lack of empathy with others that led to the Battle of Camlan, the betrayal of Sir Lancelot, and the destruction of the aristocracy of the kingdom that fell to civil war. Saber blames herself, claiming that a foolish girl who believed in too pretty an ideal, that people in the world can respect and understand each other, never should have been king, that under better guidance a better end could have been reached. Saber is a direct parallel for Shiro, a girl believing in justice and a boy who dreams of being a hero. Saber is what could await Shiro at the end of his path. someone filled only with regret as they learn that the world does not conform to their beautiful ideals. While Shiro is proof that Saber wasn't wholly wrong, that people can overcome themselves and that helping others and wanting to make the world a better place isn't a bad thing. Fate takes a look at these similar yet opposing people and brings them to a point of mutual understanding. Helping people isn't wrong, but what destroyed Saber and what is destroying Shiro isn't the unmoving nature of the world, but that they can't live for themselves. The king's duty is to their people. A hero protects others before themselves. Fate is about teaching Shiro and Saber that their own kindness and generosity can only be propagated by their ability to love themselves and take care of themselves before others. Arthur couldn't empathize with her subjects because she didn't even understand herself. Shiro starts to fall in love with Saber, their days living together during the war giving them both a bit of normalcy that they weren't used to having. But Saber is unresponsive. Her duty is to her people, which means that she must focus on the war and win the Grail before accepting her own budding feelings for Shiro. But Shiro and Saber are partners. The Grail can only be won in tandem, and Shiro urges Saber to live for herself, that the two of them can pursue their own happiness together. This is beautifully illustrated in the duo's final battle against Berserker, which is only won through Shiro using his own magic to project forth a blade in the image of Caliborn, the sword and the stone that let Saber become king, with which the duo defeats the monster in a single strike together. It's along this train of thought that the story introduces yet another character. Gilgamesh is the archer from the previous Grail War, who through a bunch of crap survived and is working with the priest Kotomine Kiri to hijack the Grail. Saber herself participated in the previous Grail War as well, having been the servant of none other than Shiro's adopted father, Kiritsugu Emiya. The fire that destroyed Shiro's life, it turns out, was caused by the fallout of the last Grail War ending short. Gilgamesh has taken an interest in Saber and the two become rivals in the last leg of the narrative. Where Shiro and Saber are about balancing selflessness and self-care, Gilgamesh is the embodiment of narcissism and solitude. Kotomine Kiri is actually the true antagonist of the story, but alas, he doesn't get a ton of development until Heaven's Feel. Following Archer and Berserker's defeat, Ilya is taken under the care of Shiro as the group plans out the end of the Grail War. Saber defeats Gilgamesh while Shiro defeats Kotomine, the duo ultimately destroying the Holy Grail once and for all, putting an end to the cycle and letting the heroic spirits finally rest. Shiro and Saber exchange their words of love before Saber disappears forever, returning to Kamlan to die. Shiro was sad with Saber gone, but together with Rin, the two continue to work and live a life they can be proud of. The end of the Fate route shows Saber return to her time, in her final moments before death with Sir Bedivere at the Round Table. Saber recalls her time with Shiro as a beautiful dream before she loses what little remains of her life, dying peacefully. Bedivere is heartbroken, but thankful that at the end, King Arthur was finally able to smile for herself and be at ease. Shiro and Saber lose each other, but they gain a trust in themselves and a rightness with their place in the world that they never would have arrived at alone. Fate Stay Night has many moving parts. Sadly, some things such as Castor, Lancer, and Shinji never reach a point of grand significance in any of the stories, while even more so, the original Master of Lancer is never even revealed until Fate Hollow Ataraxia. But there's plenty more to learn about the cast, of Archer and even of Shiro himself, which leads us to the second story and the fan favorite, Unlimited Blade Works. Unlimited Blade Works changes the focal point of the narrative from Saber to Archer. One of the more unfortunate things about this story arc is that while Tosaka Rin is the primary love interest, she is overwhelmingly overshadowed by Archer in terms of character significance, screen time, and development. I wouldn't say that Rin as a character or as a love interest is bad per se, but she's certainly nothing special in either regard. Furthermore, Unlimited Blade Works suffers from even greater pacing issues than Fate. Aside from the occasional remark here or there and Archer's ultimately uneventful betrayal to join Castor, the route is largely just filling time until Shiro and Archer can duke it out and settle their differences that mount throughout the opening and of course Fate as well. Unlimited Blade Works also loads the gun for another egregious example of the off-power scaling of the series, through the character of Castor. Castor's Noble Phantasm is a dagger that lets her steal servants. Within the constructs of the battle at hand, that's already pretty ridiculous, as without a servant protecting them, most of the masters in Fate Stay Night are powerless to truly defend themselves. That and the fact that while the servants are of generally comparable skill, a 2 versus 1 against anyone but Berserker is just absurd. As such, much like Lancer's Gay Bolg, it is used very infrequently and never to the extent that it could, as doing so would just break the game. Same can be said about Avalon, a plot device that allowed Saber to defeat Gilgamesh in Fate by joining Excalibur with the scabbard of the Holy Sword Kiritsugu left with Shiro. Avalon is never again used in the story. On an emotional level, this kind of makes sense because it's a representation of Shiro and Saber's bond, but practically, it can't be used because it's just too powerful. This again detracts from the weight of the fights, as you know all the battles could be won easily if those characters just made different decisions. As such, it feels a lot less like a structured duel and more like kids playing with their ultimate beams and ultimate shields. Returning to the plot though, one of the more interesting mysteries of Fate was that Archer claims to not remember his own identity, and he dies before we confirm what it ever was. He fights with twin blades, but is also quite a skilled archer. Rin deduces that whoever he was, he probably knew Saber in his life, leading her to think that he may have been a Knight of the Round Table, but Saber denies this. The only other thing we know about Archer is that he hates Shiro Emiya. Archer, it turns out, is Shiro himself. He is the end of Shiro's ideals, when he truly becomes the hero that he dreamed of, a skilled magus who protects the innocent. Archer doesn't desire the Grail itself. Rather, he's participating in the Holy Grail War to kill his younger self and stop him from walking his own path. Archer lived a life much like Saber. He traveled around protecting people, but was ultimately betrayed by the people he saved and sent to die. But before his life was lost, he swore a vow to the world itself to continue protecting people even after his death. He became a spirit who would be summoned to battlefields to kill the few for the sake of the many. But somewhere at the end of an endless string of killing, where he was alone and betrayed, Archer realized that he was nothing. Because Shiro Emiya isn't actually a hero. He's just a child, emulating the actions of his father. When all else was taken and he had nothing to cling to but his ideals, he was forced to see how empty they really were. Shiro and Saber aren't the same. Archer is the living proof of that. We can see Shiro's earlier remarks about archery with deeper meaning now. Not only was that detail of Chekhov's gun, but it went to show Shiro's mentality. He shot for no reason in particular. He was good at it. It was mechanical. And so too does Archer's life become mechanical and impersonal. But now he has to take lives. He saves people, but only through an endless sea of death. Throughout Unlimited Blade Works, Shiro learns to fight, emulating the twin sword style of his older self. Ironically, Archer's pushing only makes Shiro galvanize his ideals and strengthen his swordplay until the point that the two finally clash. The fight between Archer and Shiro is one of the best moments in the entire novel. It has a clear focus and is squarely about developing Shiro as a person. Sadly, Saber has a small role to play in any of the stories outside of Fate, but she still gets a few moments within this fight that offer some more insight into her character and line of thinking as well. The gang concludes Archer's identity and chase him down to the abandoned ruins of Ilya's mansion, which was destroyed after Gilgamesh killed Berserker and Ilya. With nothing left to hide, Archer unloads on Shiro, explaining the kind of life he lived and how Shiro's borrowed ideals will only ever cause him grief. Shiro is shaken by Archer's words, but resists his conclusions and the two come to blows. Every time their twin swords connect, Shiro gains some of the expertise that Archer had, which metaphorically represents him growing to understand himself and his ideals more and more. It's only when Shiro has taken as much as he can from Archer, when he has truly examined himself in detail, that he can truly oppose himself. See, Kiritsugu saved Shiro from the Great Fire caused by the previous Grail War to atone for having helped cause such a tragedy to begin with. After losing everything he knew before, Shiro gave up on himself, dedicating his life instead to living with Kiritsugu. It was because of this that when, in their last conversation together before he passed, Kiritsugu told Shiro about his old, far-off dream to be a hero and to make the world a better place, that Shiro changed. He didn't break. Shiro Emiya was always broken. He tasked himself with fulfilling Kiritsugu's dream, and without Kiritsugu there anymore, he could never stop. He didn't fight for justice because he believed in it, but because he had nothing else to fight for. That's why no amount of good deeds could ever fulfill Shiro, why it was inevitable that he would become Archer. He'd destroy himself for someone else's dream, because if he lost hold of that, then Shiro Emiya would be nothing. All of this is true, and yet Shiro keeps fighting, keeps resisting. Even if his ideals and dreams are borrowed, Shiro remembered one thing very clearly from before he met Kiritsugu, and that was a wish for the flames to stop. There's something innate about desiring happiness, about wanting to live. Yes, Shiro is a hypocrite, and yes, he is on a path of inevitable self-destruction. But even so, helping others when they can't help themselves could never be a mistake. Unlimited Blade Works takes a different thematic stance than Fate, where Fate suggests that one can only truly be happy when they live for themselves. Unlimited Blade Works embraces the entropy and says, come what may. It may be wrong, he may be fake, but Shiro Emiya will continue to be Shiro Emiya, and that is not wrong. It suggests that the holes in oneself are patched not always through change and resolve, but through meeting and knowing people, as it's Shiro's relationship with Rin that will keep him going into the future. Because Archer was alone. He had nothing to persist in except his ideals, which is why such pretty gilded things could never satisfy him. But Shiro can keep believing in justice. He can keep fighting for that inherent good while never losing his way, because his life is also fulfilled by a girl who validates him and finds that stupidity to be very beautiful. Shiro beats Archer. He doesn't overpower him, but he reminds him of the spark he once had. Archer succumbs to his own ideals. Unfortunately, the Shiro and Archer fight is not the end of the route. Gilgamesh still needs to be dealt with and the Grail needs to be thwarted. And while I don't quite find the last fight useless per se, it simply never had a chance of setting up to the Shiro and Archer fight. Shiro fights Gilgamesh and projects his own version of Unlimited Blade Works. The title, Unlimited Blade Works, is referring to Archer's own noble phantasm. It's a barren world where only swords stand. They're the only things that Archer had at the end of his life. No companions, no love, simply a field of swords housing his broken dreams. The arena is cloudy and murky, but when Shiro uses the spell for himself, the sky's clear. For Shiro has reached a conclusion that Archer had long forgotten, a faith in himself that was lost to time. Shiro beats Gilgamesh by technicality and Archer finishes him off. Saber once again destroys the Holy Grail and the day is saved. Rather than Shiro seeing off Saber, we're met with a parallel scene of Rin seeing off Archer. In their final moments, Archer lets down his hair and gives a kind smile unlike he had before. In that moment, when he has seen and recovered his ideals once more, he looks a lot like Shiro. Archer knows that Shiro will never change, that he himself will be damned to the counterforce forever. But with Rin by Shiro's side and a renewed faith in his ideals, Archer fades away peacefully nonetheless. And so the story ends not unlike how it began. Shiro will become a superhero, and Rin will become a great magus. But those once separate paths have now intersected and entangled. They will spiral forth together until the end of their days. Unlimited Blade Works for me represents the apex of the story, while also being the worst of the routes overall. The conflict between Shiro and Archer is really what Fate Stay Night is all about. Shiro Emiya is the square focus of this route, but the route as a whole is highly inconsistent. Most of the actual meat and bones of the story is condensed into the last few encounters, while much of the interactions with Caster and Assassin that take up most of the time don't really amount to much except for thinning the cast enough for the real plot to kick in. This was also the case in Fate, where the Shinji and Ilya plots were more to service the plot than the characters, but Fate still had the driving relationship between Shiro and Saber to keep it going. Shiro has a relationship with Rin in Unlimited Blade Works, but it is much less developed than Saber's, as the primary focal point is Archer. But if UBW is quite the backloaded mixed bag whose back half soars into the heavens, Heaven's Feel is quite possibly the most confounding series of events ping-ponging back and forth in quality that I have ever seen in my life. Where UBW is the worst route with the best moments, Heaven's Feel is definitely the best route with the absolutely worst moments. Where the focal point of Fate was Saber and the focal point of Unlimited Blade Works is Archer, it's hard to actually describe what the focal point of Heaven's Feel is. The obvious answer would be to say that it's about the romantic interest this time, Sakura Mato. But when you actually look at it, it's not so cut and dry. If anything, I'd say that Kotomine, Kirei, and Ilya are the beating hearts of Heaven's Feel, at least with regard to Shiro's thematic development. Put it another way, while Sakura is no doubt important to the actual plot of the arc, she functions more like Rin does in UBW, being supportive and a plot motivator, where the role of Archer is fulfilled by Ilya and Kotomine, who actually push Shiro's ideals. This confusion, sadly, spreads through the rest of the storytelling as well. And on the subject of Sakura, her romance with Shiro is no doubt the weakest. Where Saber's relationship is founded upon a strong parallel connection to Shiro and his ideals, Rin appealed to Shiro because of contrast. Shiro was freely choosing a ludicrous path of his own making, constantly reaching towards something unreachable, while Rin was tied down to tradition and duty. To Rin, Shiro was something incomprehensible and liberating. But of course, Shiro was not nearly so devoted to his own cause. So to him, Rin's strong sense of who she is and what she was doing in the world were admirable. To him, a fake walking his whole life in someone else's shoes. Sakura is sad? She's someone who suffered a lot, and Shiro was drawn to her for more or less that reason alone. Kindness begets kindness, and to look a little deeper, Sakura and Shiro are definitely drawn to one another out of a shared sense of normalcy that they see in the other. Sakura grew up in hell, and Shiro grew up out of hell. That's fine in concept, but Heaven's Feel in execution, both due to a notable lack of Sakura as a character partaking in the story, as well as some bizarre choices with regard to Shiro's motivation, fails to deliver on this premise as far as the romance goes. But that's certainly not all there is to the route, so let's look a little deeper. Where Fate was about accepting and taking care of yourself, and UBW was about persisting in your dreams because dreaming is a beautiful thing, Heaven's Feel is about rationalizing dreams with reality. Shiro was encouraged to build his own idea of happiness and to step up out of Kiritsugu's shadow, particularly because Ilya sees the mistakes that Kiritsugu made repeating themselves in Shiro, and due to their budding closeness in this arc, she tries to take care of him. Standing in opposition to that is Kotomine, who finally gets the development he needed in the Fate route. Kotomine stands adjacent to Shiro, but facing the other direction. He's as empty a person as Shiro, but where Shiro is able to persist on Kiritsugu's dream and later learn to care for himself with the help of Ilya, Kotomine has nothing. He almost grasped at happiness once, but lost it somewhere along the way. He viciously reaches for meaning, hoping to ask the girl for what purpose he is even alive. While all this is quite interesting and the meat and potatoes of what makes Heaven Feel so good, before we can go any further we must address the fact that Heaven's Feel, as a part of the anthology of Fate Stay Night, makes no sense at all. Heaven's Feel diverges greatly from the story pathing of Fate and UBW due to the intervention of a character who henceforth has not even appeared in the story. Mato Zoken, the grandfather of Shinji and Sakura, decides to partake in the Grail War, intervening in the action by joining the war and infecting Sakura with all of the world's evils. We learn at some point that the Grail was not actually quite as nice as it seems. There's a deep darkness that lingers within the Holy Grail that corrupted it. We learn in Fate Zero that Kiritsugu rejected the Grail himself for that very reason. During the last war, Mato Zoken was able to recover a piece of the incomplete Grail, which he then injected into a young Sakura Mato. During Heaven's Feel, and only Heaven's Feel, Sakura is infected by all the world's evils, Angra Mainyu, and becomes a monster going around killing servants and disrupting the Grail War. Not only that, but also in Heaven's Feel, we learn that the man we knew as Assassin was actually a bit of a fraud. The Assassin Servant is always supposed to be the same servant every Grail War, but due to the fact that the Assassin was summoned by Caster and not a conventional master, this was circumvented. But in Heaven's Feel, apropos of nothing, the real assassin, Hassan of the Cursed Arm, just jumps out of Sasaki Kojiro's chest and starts killing servants. There are a lot of problems with this. Firstly and obviously being the question of why none of this happens in any of the other routes. What is Mato Zoken doing and why does he choose not to partake in the war? And talking about True Assassin himself, he also has the too strong a power problem. His noble phantasm, Zabania, is effectively similar to Lance's Gay Bolg in that it's a near instant kill that targets your heart. But unlike Lancer, he actually gets to use it and kill people. Furthermore, as I alluded to earlier, at the end of the route, Shiro demonstrates that he's able to project Rule Breaker and the Crow's Claw, the noble phantasms of Caster and Berserker. If this is possible, why is it never done by either Shiro or Archer at any point before this? Or for that matter, why any of the other noble phantasms are never projected for this same reason? Either way, convulsion and all, the story goes on as such. Sakura, infected with the darkness, corrupts servants while True Assassin picks off the others. Shiro ends up losing Saber and Archer, but in the process gets Archer's arm grafted onto him, which allows him to protect what he has left, namely Ilya, and save Sakura from Angra Mainyu. During all this, we learn a little bit more about Ilya herself. Shiro's interactions with Ilya mainly center around Shiro coming to understand that Ilya is a girl who never got to have a childhood. She has a capacity for kindness and a wonder of a child, but she has been trained as the Einsborn Magus for all her life, and became particularly distant when she lost her father and mother, her father being none other than Kiritsugu Emiya. Shiro ends up becoming more and more entwined with Ilya as he sees that she is not beyond normalcy and redemption. It's Shiro simply treating Ilya as a normal person that makes her open up, and in turn it's that closeness that leads Ilya to try and stop Shiro from becoming like their father. Kiritsugu Emiya really wanted to save the world, but in doing so he lost the family that he loved dearly. The good of the many outweigh the good of the few, even if that few was his wife and daughter. He picked Shiro up after the Grail War as a means of atoning and making something out of a life left only in failure. He saved many, but was truly alone. In Shiro, Ilya sees that same person, that same kind man pursuing the road to solitude, which we know is more than possible but flat out likely due to the existence of Archer. Ilya is interesting because more than any other character in the story, she wants to help and save Shiro as much as Shiro wants to save other people. And in Kotomine, we see another path that Shiro could have taken. Kotomine is a sociopath, but for a long time he was still quite functional. For Kotomine, his happiness only came at the despair of others. He met a girl who was terminally ill and the two wed, Kotomine trying to see if the love of another could move him to feel. The two ended up conceiving a child that plays a minor role in Fate Hollow Ataraxia, but even then, Kotomine never felt anything. As Claudia Hortensia died, Kotomine was crying, and yet he told her that he never loved her. She simply smiled and said that he was mistaken, and that he truly did somewhere inside. As Claudia died, Kira lamented only that he couldn't kill her himself. Still, he recognized that Claudia was without a doubt a saint for loving someone like him. We see two things in Kotomine's story. One is the danger of emptiness and longing. Shiro has that same emptiness. It's simply filled temporarily with Kiritsugu's ideals. Kotomine wasn't so lucky as to have anything to cling to. But a more interesting thing about Kotomine's story, I find, is what it doesn't explicitly say. Namely, I do think that Kotomine loved Claudia. He was just too broken to see his feelings. They were foreign to him, and as such he didn't know what happiness even was. But when Claudia died, she was right. Kotomine did love her, which is why that when he was alone again, he lost all control, seeking power from a greater entity simply to give him a purpose, to understand himself. Kotomine is what could await Shiro if he ever loses himself, if he loses that hold Kiritsugu has on his destiny. But that's another one of the interesting things about Shiro Emiya. As Archer, Saber, Kiritsugu, and Kotomine have all proven, Shiro is walking down a dangerous path that will almost certainly lead to his destruction at some point down the line. He learned that from different sources each route, but it's a fact that he has no choice but to face. And yet he walks it anyway. Because even if it hurts him, even if it may hurt some others, helping people isn't wrong. Shiro sincerely believes this. It may be the only thing he really believes organically. And just like he did for Kiritsugu, someone else will one day pick up Shiro's torch. Kindness begets kindness, for that dream is not a mistake. Sakura and Kotomine kill Manto Zoken, but the ghoul's soul remains persisting. Ilia assumes an old Ainsburn family heirloom to help save Shiro from the corrupted Grail and appears before Zoken. In his final moments, confronted with Ilia, who so much resembles the original Ainsburn who started the Grail War with Zoken, he remembers that once he too wished to save the world, and dies peacefully. Shiro defeats the corrupted Saber and Rin holds off Sakura. Sakura is saved from the corrupted Grail, but even after the process is thwarted, Kotomine remains. Shiro and Kotomine clash. Kotomine persisting that Shiro can never find meaning, and Shiro saying that the answers he creates for himself are enough. To echo his own Unlimited Blade Works prayer, this life needs no meaning. Ultimately, the two destroy each other, Shiro's life only barely hanging on by a thread. Ilia saves Shiro and closes off the Grail, but at the cost of her own life. Heaven's Feel ends with Shiro's body having been repaired and a brief reference to the Garden of Sinners, as Shiro and Sakura are ready to face tomorrow together. Heaven's Feel as a whole package is difficult to describe. The scenes with Ilia and Kotomine are some of the best and most hard-hitting in the entire visual novel, but the romance with Sakura is incredibly poorly written as the two share such little time together and have such a lackluster bond relative to Rin and especially to Saber that it makes it impossible to believe that Shiro would actually betray his ideals as much as he does for her. Indeed, the worst part about Heaven's Feel and about Sakura is how she undermines Shiro, which is particularly damning when you realize that Heaven's Feel was only readable after Unlimited Blade Works, where Shiro and his ideals are the strongest. There are consistently a lot of great things happening with the secondary cast, but it's at the cost of the main plot being ineffectual and incoherent for most of the duration. Taking all this into consideration, what is Fate Stay Night? Stay Night is the story of Shiro Emiya, a broken boy trying to reconcile his overwhelming desire to do good with an imperfect world as well as his own weaknesses. Fate explores how no amount of good work alone can satisfy someone if they take no time to live for themselves, while also introducing the idea that's expounded upon in Unlimited Blade Works that self-sacrifice is only self-fulfilling, as pain done unto oneself can never truly bring anyone any happiness. Unlimited Blade Works, then, is about realizing all of the hypocrisy inherent in heroism and in Shiro Emiya, and realizing that, for all the pain, there is good in helping people. That no one wants to suffer, and even if we never reach a utopian state, no one has the right to call heroism bad. Heaven's Feel, however, critiques that idea. It, more like Fate, says that while all of those ideals may be true, and while people like Shiro and Kiritsugu really are heroes, the best way to live is by devoting yourself to the people close to you. That people should try and make each other happy rather than shouldering the weight of the world themselves. The problem with Fate Stay Night is that that isn't all it is. There is an unbelievable amount of fluff in the storytelling. So many characters and scenes build up to nothing. While Stay Night has some of the best characters, and especially some of the best villains that I've ever seen in anything except, well, Tsukihime, it is so overbloated as to make the whole package incredibly mixed. And it was keeping with this balancing act between intense personal character narrative and extraneous fluff that led to one of the strangest structured stories I've ever seen in my life. Fate: Hollow Ataraxia. Hollow Ataraxia pretends to be a sequel to Stay Night, but in all reality, it happens if not concurrently with the story, only shortly then after. During Hollow Ataraxia, you were treated to two goings-on: a serious and emotional story about a henceforth never-before-seen character, Bazette Fraga McRemitz, and her servant in the Holy Grail War, the servant of the class Avenger, and a seemingly endless stream of nonsensical hijinks with the cast of Stay Night. Ataraxia has you navigate a map and choose to watch these wacky scenes and events in large chunks between actual story segments with Bazette and Avenger. I say that this is bizarre, but it's actually nearly identical in structure and execution to the fan disc sequel for Tsukihime that Type Moon created as well, entitled Kagetsutoya. It's a strange way to mitigate the desire to both have silly fan service and a serious plot that I don't really think is to the story's benefit, especially when you consider that the story of Bazette and Avenger is absolutely amazing. If one were to isolate the main story segments concerning the adventure and Grail War of Bazette and Avenger, and if that compilation could be considered a route like Fate, Unlimited Blade Works, and Heaven's Feel, it would without a doubt be the best route in both games. The story goes like this. Bazette is a magus that was sent to Fuyuki City to participate in the Holy Grail War, but when she wakes she finds that the war has already started, and that she has summoned a class of servant that wasn't supposed to exist. Bazette and Avenger battle their way through the Holy Grail War but inevitably die. But Avenger's ability lets him loop time in a closed space, giving the duo ample time to learn to fight. Bazette is serious and dedicated to her cause, which brings her into contention with the crass and mean Avenger, but the two soon find themselves growing more and more amicable. Everything, however, is not how it seems. It turns out that Bazette is actually the original master of Lancer and Stay Night, who was killed before the events of Stay Night by Kotomine. Avenger's true identity is none other than Angra Mainyu, the personification of evil that corrupts the Holy Grail. Except that's not exactly true either. Angra Mainyu, we learn, is not literally the Zoroastrian embodiment of evil, but a normal person. In their life before they became a hero, they were simply a person who was chosen at random to become the scapegoat for all the world's evils. They were tortured and betrayed, stripped of their identity and forced to become an embodiment of evil, that the people may have something to hate and despise and in turn keep them living. Inadvertently, this led to them becoming a heroic spirit, in spite of the fact that he did nothing but receive malice and grow to hate all of the world. At some point, Avenger became fused with the Grail, where his spite corrupted it. But following the events of Stay Night, where Avenger witnessed the journey of the cast, something changed within him. Seeing the children fight against that darkness, he decided on a whim to use his powers as the Holy Grail to save Bazette, the fallen master who never got a chance to fight. What we see in Hollow Ataraxia is a dream. Bazette gets to fight in the Grail War in this dream, weaved by Avenger, time itself resetting until she can succeed. Meanwhile, Avenger himself lives out a fantasy as well, the fantasy of normalcy. The scenes that appear to be stupid fluff with Shiro were actually Avenger letting himself experience what it could mean and feel like to live a normal life, as all they knew in theirs was suffering. Bazette is thankful for Avenger giving her this dream, but she doesn't want it to end, for her life to end. But Avenger reveals that he has used the Holy Grail to save her life. Once this dream ends, Bazette will awake to a new day, ready to live it however she pleases. Having bore witness the events of Stay Night, Avenger felt for once that he wanted to be that kind of hero as well. The title, Hollow Ataraxia, is alluding to just that. An ataraxia is a feeling of great relief and joy, but that feeling is a lie. It's hollow, an imitation. But as Unlimited Blade Works taught us, there's no rule that an imitation can surpass the original. And even if their time spent together was fake, Bazette and Avenger leave the story changed forever, for the good. The two part and Bazette wakes up, the events of the Grail War as well as her crushing sense of duty behind her. She and Avenger will never meet again, but it's clear that if their lives had never intersected, neither of them would ever have been saved. Ataraxia is not a sequel to Stay Night per se, in that it has almost nothing to do with the cast or direct goings-on of the plot. That said, it carries forward and expounds upon the main ideas of Stay Night in a wonderful way through Bazette's lessons learned about caring for yourself and Avenger discovering the beauty of heroism. That's so much more than can be said about most of the Fate spin-offs that have come since, even the illustrious Fate Zero. Where Ataraxia trips up is in its commitment to fan service, which kneecaps the pacing of the narrative. While the portions focusing on Bazette and Avenger are fantastic, they make up an overwhelming minority of the story, as random hijinks and flashy action take up the rest, all of which is made especially meaningless when you remember that all of Hollow Ataraxia is literally a dream. I really can't stress enough that Hollow Ataraxia, for all of the great things about it, has the pacing of a dead duck. All that said, what can we learn from Fate? Fate is a series with ceaseless ambition, whose dreams are so big that it could never execute on their premise. 7 masters, 7 servants, 14 characters all in a brutal deathmatch to change the world. It's this concept that people love, but that kind of epic spanning tome is never what Type Moon excelled at. Fate Stay Night is about Shiro Emiya, and the people who reflect and comment on his ideals, just as Ataraxia is about Bazette and Avenger. Strong characters and character dynamics. That is what Type Moon does and has always done best. But all this does is leave characters like Castor, Lancer, and Shinji as mere footnotes that take up extraneous time. It's what leaves Ataraxia a complete mess of screwed up pacing. At its best, Fate is a series with some of the greatest antagonists I've ever seen in Kotomine and Archer, as well as a stunningly developed protagonist in Shiro Emiya. But at its worst, it's tripping over itself in Heaven's Feel and dying like a beached whale in Ataraxia. Fate's structure both lends itself to boundless creativity, while also dooming itself to the promises too grand to actually keep. But that dream is awfully beautiful, isn't it? Even if it's wrong, I'm not sure I could call it a mistake. And just like with Kiritsugu, sometimes you can't always see your dreams through yourself. Sometimes it takes another to bring those dreams to fruition. But that's a story for another time. Thank you.